turn this off. Alright, I thought it wasn't going live, but it looks like it has. So, hi everyone. Just give a minute or two for everyone to get online. Excited about tonight's feed. Excuse my beanie, it's a bit cold in here. So just give it a minute or two for people to jump on. So let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and whether it's as cold in your house as it is in mine. Hopefully that heater is not too loud there either. So, all right. So we'll get started now. Tonight, I really wanted to come to you and speak around communication. So I want to speak into a particular technique. Communication is something that in my previous relationship with my ex was something that failed completely. And there was many reasons for that. We were both at fault for that. And so it's something that I've really worked on since. And of course, it's not something that I will confess, it's not something that I am like brilliant at yet, but it's something that I work at all the time, and I'm really conscious of that. And I wanted to share with you tonight a particular tool that I learned, which is around how to communicate with a partner, with a friend, with anyone basically. And it's a really way of deep connection, and a way of really being able to tune in and to really get into what is coming up for you. Because what we have a habit of doing when we communicate with people is that we either go into the mode where we want to yell and scream and get our views across and let the other person know like we want to be heard, or we go into that whole I'm going to run away and I'm not going to deal with this, and we'll just try and push it down and not deal with the emotion that comes up. So what we want to look at is, instead of like that response where we yell and blame or run away, what we want to look at is actually getting together and actually having a beautiful communication about what has triggered us. So it's not necessarily a technique that you would do in the moment, although I guess once you're really practiced with it you could, but it's more of something that you would say, okay, perhaps someone's done something that's triggered you, and you can say to them, look, what you've said to me has really triggered me. I'd like to have a conversation around this, but not right in this moment, because I'm just feeling too much emotion right now. And then so you can take your time to gather your thoughts and then come back together. And then it's something you really need to discuss and to set up as a beautiful communication around whatever has triggered you. So what you do is you basically set the scene with your partner, friend, whoever you're doing it with, and you sit down together. You cross your legs and sit like basically touching knee to knee, so that you've got that close proximity to each other. You look in each other's eyes, so that you've got that deep connection there as well by looking at them. And you could even do this if it's not with a partner. You could even just do it with someone like sitting like across from each other on chairs or something like that. Try not to have anything in between you to stop the energy flowing. So yeah, basically sit with them, preferably cross-legged, with knees touching, looking in each other's eyes, and then set up some ground rules around the conversation that you're going to have. So things like when you're speaking, that both parties must only ever speak from an I perspective. So instead of a situation, say, it might be that, let's just think of something silly, something like your partner always leaves their clothes on the floor. So instead of starting with something like, you always leave your clothes on the floor, so what you need to do is to actually come from a perspective of I. So how do I feel when that happens? So all of the communication that you have with each other, you can't use the word you. You can only come from a perspective of I. So how does that make you feel? So if you're sitting together, sitting across from each other, cross-legged, looking in each other's eyes, you can have like a talking stick or something that you use as like once a person's got that, they are speaking until they're finished, and then they pass it on to the other person so that they can have their say. So that's really important, because you don't want to be rushed in what you're saying. And it's okay, we get to that point where we feel there can't be silence in a situation like that. We're having a discussion and that person might be gathering their thoughts. They might just need to breathe for a minute before they say the next thing. And what we have a tendency to want to do is to fill that space. So by having a talking stick or something along those lines, even if it's just like a remote, that the person who's talking gets to keep going until they've said what they need to say, and then they pass it to the other party, and then they can have their say. So the idea is, when we communicate in this way, instead of us going to blaming of you're doing this, you said this, that makes me feel. So instead of all the conversation being around blaming, is we're actually taking responsibility for how that actually makes us feel when they're doing that particular thing. So it might be, just going back to the clothes on the floor as an example. So instead of like, you always leave your clothes on your floor, it's like, I've asked you so many times to pick it up. So there we're kind of blaming and everything. Whereas we might drop into that, take a deep breath, and then just say, I really feel like I put a lot of effort into keeping this place tidy. I have to look after and pick up after the kids all the time. And I feel that that you don't value what I'm doing when clothes are left on the floor. And it might be that it makes me feel like it doesn't matter if we've got a messy house, so why do I bother doing the rest? So just kind of carrying on that path of how it actually makes you feel. So it's a really great technique of swapping around the way that we actually communicate with people, and taking responsibility for what's actually being triggered in us, rather than putting all the blame onto them. And what that does is it helps them to drop into their heart space and to really check in, and they can actually really feel you and feel, instead of you're going blame, 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 they're going, wow, I didn't even know that made like her or him or her feel that way. So it's a really beautiful way of communicating with each other. So I urge you all to give it a try. So if there's something that you're being triggered over, set up the environment and communicate in this way instead of your usual discussion or argument or running away from a situation. Get together and actually try this communication technique. And I'd love to hear back in the group as to how it went, as opposed to how things would normally happen. So if you're just checking in now, be sure to go back to the beginning of the video and watch the whole thing through. We've just spoken about a different way, a communication technique, which can really help to avoid situations where we get into arguments or where we start a blame game and we go round in circles and nothing ever gets resolved. So check out from the beginning of the video, and I'd love to hear your feedback if you give it a go as to what worked and what didn't for you, if there's anything that felt uncomfortable initially and how that progressed through the discussion that you had. I'd love to hear about it. So have a beautiful night. If you're in Perth, and I'm sure other parts of Australia, try and stay warm. That's why I've got my beanie on, it's freezing in here. So just remember, in sex, love and life, always stay true to you. Have a beautiful night, guys.